Hello and welcome to Unscripted Abbreviated. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden, sitting, I think, on a knife edge.
Is it comfortable?
No, it's not. Catherine, what we're about to do is going to be very difficult indeed. And I think one of the things we have to pray and invite you, the listener, to pray is for a clarity of hearing, because we're dealing, I think, with one of the most difficult subjects of the decade of our culture. This is going to be very difficult to do, but it's very important.
Mm. Yes, and it's the Euros final. No, it isn't. I'm just kidding. It's not football. I realise that we're not doing Catholic Unscripted because we're meeting for that shortly, but we're doing abbreviated. So what I would always do is say the date, because it's our news commentary. So it's Wednesday, the 10th of July, and I hadn't done that. So very welcome to any new members. Thank you for picking up a membership. Do get in touch on info@catholicunscripted.com if you have any questions, or if you would like some back copies of episodes that you missed before you were a member. And please do encourage others to pick up a membership if you see value in what we're doing. So,
can I say something at this point? Can I just say, just in case we decide to release this to the wider public, should you, the wider public, hear this, please consider supporting us. Catherine's drawn up this excellent membership scheme. I don't think you're going to hear the kind of conversation, partly because the way Catherine facilitates this mainly, but you'll hear it when Mark joins us, of a different kind. But I think that what we do is enormously important, and I'm extremely grateful to be able to discuss a difficult issue like the one we're limbering up for in this context, first of all, and I'd be very grateful if you'd consider supporting us as we do this kind of thing.
Thank you, Gavin. Well, so the conversation is around an interview that has taken place between the Petersons, both Tammy and Jordan, and Tommy Robinson, called "Why the Establishment Hates This Man." Now, around about 9 years ago, I think it was, Tommy Robinson was asked to speak at the Oxford Union, to address the Oxford Union, where he covered some of the same material as he's spoken about with Jordan Peterson. And a lot has happened since that Oxford Union address, which he's able to talk about here. The reason we wanted to address it, you might think, well, why are you talking about Tommy Robinson? First of all, we have never billed this as anything but a news commentary. So we're commentating on the things that people are talking about in the news and with a Catholic lens. So this has come to our attention. A lot of people have been talking about it. A lot of people have shared it with us and asked us for our view on it. So that's the reason we're addressing this. So Why the Establishment Hates This Man. It's a long watch. It's an hour and 44 minutes. And in fact, it's only a part one because Robinson goes through his life, what began his activism up to about 2018. And there's still some years to go. So Jordan has said, come back to me and we'll have a part two. It's a very, very interesting watch, isn't it, Gavin? What were your initial thoughts having watched it?
Catherine, I thought I was seeing the most important interview ever. And I know this sounds hyperbolic, but I couldn't believe it. There are two issues. One is the fact that Jordan Peterson is interviewing Tommy Robinson, who is a profoundly toxic figure. I can't imagine in English culture many more toxic people than Tommy Robinson. You only have to mention the name, and it produces a visceral reaction in people. And I think only Jordan Peterson could provide a platform which would give sufficient pause for people to listen to what was said rather than engage in the reaction. And the reason the reaction is there is because every single media outlet, including the judiciary, who are not a media outlet, obviously, but a source of information, and the police, have vilified Tommy Robinson to the point at which he's essentially, by reputation, public enemy number one. And it makes it very, very difficult if all you get is that level of vilification to hear what's being said without filtering it through a presumption that this man is evil, bad, prejudiced, deformed, morally corrupted, and therefore I can't listen to what he says. Only Jordan Peterson, with the enormous trust that his own commitment to truth has produced, I think, could offer a platform where provisionally or potentially at any rate, people might be willing to try to suspend all the instincts they have about Tommy Robinson in order to listen to the facts of the conversation. So we've got two things. One, this is cancellation par excellence. Tommy Robinson is the most cancelled person I think I can think of in the English-speaking world. And Jordan Peterson, who they tried to cancel, is trying to detoxify him and decancel him. That's the first thing. The next thing is what Tommy Robinson says true? Because if it's true, there is a massive, and I think we have to say conspiracy. I can't think of another word. Let's look for another word. There's a massive strategy of stopping the truth being told about mass immigration, mass Islamification, mass replacement, mass crime, mass drug cartels, mass prostitution circuits, and the mass ravaging, raping, and brutalizing of young English women. And the government, the police, the judiciary, the press are complicit in stopping the truth coming out. And the only person who was willing and brave enough to tell the truth, if it is the truth, was Tommy Robinson. What do you hear when you listen to him speak about it, is the question.
And that is the question. I listened very carefully. I don't follow Tommy. He's not somebody I have known a lot about. I've heard his name. I mean, for most of the last 15 years, I've been raising kids. I've only latterly, as they've got older, been able to devote more time to the kind of work that we're doing now. So during that period that Tommy was probably at his most prolific. So I didn't come to this really with any kind of preconception. I'd heard the name and I'd heard a few things, but I didn't come with any prejudices. I just sat and thought, I'm going to listen I listened to the Oxford Union address. And I think what you said there is the key question. Does he seem manic? Did he seem unstable? Is he perfect? Was he a Christian? Did he use poor language? Did he express himself well? None of these are the issue at hand. The issue at hand for me is he speaking the truth? And after watching it, my view was, yes, he's speaking the truth. He grew up not that far from where I grew up. I went to school in Stevenage. He mentions Letchworth, which is a town where lots of the kids from my school came from. I know Luton reasonably well. So I had a sense, in a way that probably Jordan Peterson and Tammy Peterson don't have, of the sense of place. But he gave a good picture of what it was like. And as I listened to him, I thought, this man is speaking the truth. And worse than that, when he started speaking about what we now know happened in Rotherham and the way in which these girls have been treated in their droves. I've got 3 daughters. I found myself like welling up, because so innocent, so beautiful, and the idea that would be ravaged by a deliberate attempt to hook her on drugs, to get her vulnerable, and to take her innocence away is appalling. He makes it clear. He makes it absolutely clear that this is not. He's not talking about all Muslims. He's not talking about. He's been accused of racism. I know that. He quite rightly says he has a lot of supporters who are black. He's got Hindu friends, Sikh friends. He's got many Muslim friends. He's talking about a faction, an extremist faction of Islam, which has been shown to be problematic and is a real threat. You've raised it, and it's a real threat, and he speaks about it. And what I found really frightening was, especially when he was speaking, Gavin, about the Syrian refugee in in the school who had water poured on him, and how that was presented to the world, and then what he was able to demonstrate about what the bigger picture, the bigger context was, and how that was hidden from view, was really quite frightening, I think, in terms of what we so it's always about truth, isn't it? About what we are allowed to know, and what is hidden from us. So I came away with the view, when I listen to this man speak now, he's telling the truth. I also think he has remarkable courage. Um, and that's my assessment thus far. If other people come and say, look at this, you overlook this, here's this, I'll look at that. But if you're asking me for my assessment now, this is a man speaking the truth, and also a man of great courage.
I agree with that. I'd like to move from Tommy Robinson's character. I mean, obviously, one of the things people do is they say, well, even if he's telling the truth, he's just such a blackguard, he's not entitled to be a bearer of the truth because he's a fascist, a racist, a member of the BNP, whatever. One of the interesting things that Robinson says is, I don't have clean hands. I've been a bad boy. That's true. I have been. But I think in terms of Christian ethical position, let him who is without sin of any kind cast the first stone. The thing that shocked me was different. I was shocked that agents of local government bribed the headmaster in the case where the white boy was shown on television pouring water over the head of a Syrian boy. They bribed him with money to silence him, and they made him sign non-disclosure agreements. In fact, the council, because it's a matter of public record, had spent something like £250,000 silencing people in this particular case. I was even more shocked when I remember Tommy Robinson being arrested as he filmed himself on the magistrates, it was Crown Court probably in Canterbury. I grew up in Canterbury, I was at school there. And what had happened was some girls had gone into a kebab shop, they'd been lured upstairs, they'd been raped, the DNA of 6 men was found inside them. And when the men were tried, and I think nothing happened to them, I may be wrong about that, let's move on. What happened to Robinson was that he stood on the steps of the Crown Court, photographing himself, saying these people have allegedly, and they may be innocent, raped children in these circumstances, which was true. In fact, they were found to have done so. The judge immediately sent him to prison for 2 years without a trial, no jury, no trial, for contempt of court, because technically you can do that. If it's contempt of court, it's simply a fact that the judiciary decide. But for standing within 6 feet of the perimeter of the Crown Court and videoing himself, he was incarcerated for 2 years without
13
on
months,
judicial whim.
to be.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you very no. Hooray! Thank you very much. That's really important. 13 months, not 24. 13. He was, and he was then. The authorities then moved him from a relatively non-Muslim prison to one of the most Muslim prisons, where his life was in danger, and he was eventually actually beaten up very badly. Now, the reason this matters to me is because it suggests a level of malignant injustice on behalf of the judiciary, to say nothing of the police. He describes the two-level policing, which we all know about. I didn't believe the judiciary was capable of this kind of malevolent injustice. And I was very taken aback. But let's go back to the really important thing. The really important thing, which other people have put in the public domain, is that there have been grooming and paedophilic raping of young British girls who were compromised and became part of prostitution rackets by Pakistani men who happened to be Muslim, and the authorities did nothing about it, and then tried to cover it up. And what Robinson's been doing is to end the cover up by bringing it into the public domain. So it doesn't really matter whether he sweats, whether he's hyper, or whether his sanity has been compromised by living in solitary confinement under the threat of murder, or whether he doesn't speak very well and his syntax is occasionally off, or whether any other personal characteristics. What matters is he giving a factually correct narrative of what's taking place in our society? And at every stage, as I listened to that whole interview, it seemed to me that he was. And if he is, this suggests a cover-up which goes from the bottom to the very top of society, including the government, who apparently he accuses, and I think it's a reasonable supposition, for being behind the attempt to portray this particular episode with the Syrian refugee in order to justify the mass immigration of Muslim Syrians when they did. A level of cover-up that goes from the local policeman to the Prime Minister is really very serious.
I think what's also worth noting is something that it's hard not to see is going to get worse under a Labour government, which is the reason so much cover-up took place is for fear of accusations of Islamophobia. We can't address this. It's so huge in its scale, and because all the people involved are Muslims, we'll be accused of Islamophobia. Am I right? I don't know this, but am I right in thinking that Keir Starmer has been speaking about bringing in a law against Islamophobia specifically?
Yes, the new definition of Islamophobia, which was put together by a group of Muslims and has been adopted by a large number of councils, and the Labour Party in opposition committed themselves to legislating on it, is draconian. And we couldn't have this conversation if that law had been passed. We simply couldn't. We'd be criminalised, which means we wouldn't. Which means the very thing that Robinson is trying to bring to the surface, and that only Peterson has provided him a platform to do, could only have had an effect for as long as that definition is not passed into law. It can be passed into law any week now. So there's a window of opportunity. I mean, I see this as actually an enormously serious crisis. Just before a week, a month, a year, I don't know how long, but just before the Labour Party puts into practice what it promised about adopting and criminalising any criticism or perceived criticism of Islam, this breaks, and only Jordan Peterson could have provided, if you like, the guarantor of how does one describe this? Could provide the potential detoxification of Tommy Robinson to give people a chance to listen to him. Now, as I read through the tweets, Peterson said, "I expect you two to pull this," and you saw people saying, "But he's a fascist, but he's a racist, but he's an Islamophobe, but here are all the things wrong with him, but he's uncouth, but he's a ruffian, but he's uneducated, but he's stupid, but he's evil." And these were from people who simply couldn't, well, if they had listened to it, that means the level of toxification and brainwashing had sunk so deep they were unable to give space to the hypothesis that what he was saying might have been true.
Mm. Well, I think I didn't think he came across as a racist. I really didn't. And if people feel that they can accuse him of racism, I would want to say, what evidence is there that he's racist? And if somebody says, here's some evidence he's racist, well, then that's something to look at alongside other things that indicate he isn't racist. But I think simply
Can I address,
say
can I address that?
Yeah.
But just because you've set the thing up perfectly, that's exactly right. So he goes to great lengths in his conversation to say that Luton is one of the most diverse places in the country. But at the very beginning, when he began to protest against Islamic terrorist organizations using the square of Luton to convert people to terrorism, he did so with a mixture of black and white English boys. The fact is, he grew up in a conversation, and the people, his attention was drawn to the Arabic intentions of the central mosque in Luton by Muslim friends who called him bruv. They said, "Bruv, you need to look at the mosque." I love the idea of Muslim teenagers in Luton saying to Tommy Robinson, "Listen, bruv, you need to look over there." So
I
as
like
you hear him
the
describe,
sound of Gavin Ashenden saying bruv.
as you listen
That's
to
worth a membership.
his youth, as you listen to his youth, his engagement with people across the racial spectrum is without prejudice. His problem was only ever with Islam. He said that time and time and time and time and time again.
He also happens to say with radical Islam, and with he
Yes, he does.
he even does
Yeah,
distinguish between those friends of his that you've just said, Muslim friends who've said we're worried about this, and then the radical. And he, as he said, you could trace the Stockholm bomber and others back to this hub in Luton. So that's where it began, his concern.
And he says to Jordan Peterson, "My view is to say to Muslims, if you want to come to this country and live alongside us and adopt our civilization, you come and welcome." Those are not the words of a public racist or Islamophobe.
Yeah. Many years ago now, in fact, you know this, and you, me and Mark all have similar stories, which is partly why I think in God's great providence, we've been brought together. Many years ago, I raised concerns about a priest in the church. And the concerns were brushed away, and I raised concerns again, and the concerns were brushed away, and I raised them at the higher level, and I was told, keep your mouth shut. This person studied at the best pontifical academy in Rome. Don't you know who you're talking to? Respect your elders. I then raised concern about another case. This is two cases within the church, and actually ended up in court as a witness in one case, and was told by a then bishop, well, what you have to understand is this person is a great choir master, and they're hard to come by. So it's very small scale. It's nothing in comparison to what Tommy Robinson has spoken about, but I understand that sense of, and I really was in turmoil about this. I was praying about it. I sought counsel about it. I recognised that these are cases where I'm, in some cases, blowing the whistle on my superiors in a workplace, or certainly within the church, bishops, and I was essentially told to be quiet, don't say anything, cover it up. Not only that, but told who do you think you are? You're nobody. Don't you know and then the accolades of where someone studied, as if that takes away, as if that justifies the sort of behaviour that I was concerned about. So I think that I see in Tommy, what I'm trying to say is I saw in Tommy, as he was speaking, the instincts of a man who wanted to try and just raise concerns. And I also saw those same efforts to shut him up and push him down and keep him quiet and present a different picture. And I don't like it. I don't like it where I see it.
I'd like to add to your story with one of mine. And the end of it is where Tommy Robinson mocks me personally. So the reason I want to put it in is because I'm not at all clear what the right ethical judgments in the story are, but I want to share it as part of the complexity because I didn't know what to do. So what happened was that, I don't know, it must have been about perhaps 2017, 2018, I got a message saying Tommy Robinson wanted to speak to me. He was going to appear on the steps of the Royal Courts of Justice, some particular episode in his brush with the law, and he'd heard about me, or he knew about me, and he wanted me to stand next to him as a Christian Anglican bishop figure to give him moral support. So a meeting was arranged, a secret meeting in a hotel in London, and I went with some supporters who brokered it, and he had some supporters too. And he sat down and he asked me if I would stand next to him in public. And I have to say that at this time, I wasn't entirely clear in my own head what Tommy Robinson stood for. I had heard all the reports as well. I had a number of instincts, a number of questions, but I honestly didn't know. And I thought probably he was tarred to some extent with, I don't know, some form of unacceptable far right. I hesitate to use the word, God forbid me for using that dreadful phrase, behaviour. But I was very hesitant. So I said to him, Tommy, I'm not interested in your quest to purify English society. I'm only interested in the kingdom of heaven. If you became a Christian, I would stand by you. If you don't become a Christian, then I won't. In my own judgment, I thought that the toxification of Tommy Robinson was something my own reputation wouldn't survive. And I think I was right about that. Whatever the rights and wrongs of it, I think that was the right judgment. They wouldn't survive it. And so I then said, I'd like to persuade you to be a Christian. All right. He said, go on, try. So I talked to him about Jesus. It was very interesting, in fact, watching Jordan Peterson say to Tommy Robinson in this interview, Tommy, do you know about the parable of the rich young ruler? And Tommy said, no, what's that? No idea. So
You should have said, yeah, Gavin Ashenden told me 10 years ago.
If only. So Jordan Peterson then he then gave him a kind of mini lecture on the psychological and theological implications. But what was surprising was where Tommy had absolutely no idea. So we had this. I tried to share the gospel with him, and then I asked if I could pray for him And he said, yes, I laid hands on him and I prayed for the Holy Spirit to give him clarity. And so in the course of this meeting, I thought I'd done everything I could. The really sad bit about this, and the bit that makes me look a bit stupid, was about a week later, someone directed my attention to a private YouTube. And in his YouTube, Tommy, I think probably drunk, talked to his friends about how this, I don't know if he said idiot bishop or idiot Anglican or idiot person, whatever it was, but me anyway, had spent some time trying to evangelize him. And he, Tommy, wasn't falling for that kind of shit. I felt really stupid because he appeared to take me at face value and he hadn't. And he appeared to appreciate what I said and he didn't. He appeared to have some time for what I was trying to tell him about God. He hadn't. I was taken in. Well, that's okay. All one can do is try. I told him I wouldn't stand with him if he wasn't a Christian. I would if he was. He wasn't. I didn't. Looking back, I didn't realize until I heard this interview with Peterson, I didn't realize how this was essentially all about the raping of white young girls. The whole thing is only about that. And what happens when you try to bring that to the public attention and you try to make people in the education system, in the police, in the local councils, in the judiciary, in the press, in the prison service, when you try to make them aware of it, it's only about that and the corruption that followed. I think if I'd been more aware of that, I might have then made what would have been the wrong decision, which is to say, I'll risk my public reputation by standing next to you at that time. In 2017, it would never have survived the level of brainwashing that everybody, including me, had. Now, what's different, I think, is that Peterson has given people, including me, the opportunity of hearing the whole story and supposedly the facts as they're presented. And everyone listening to this is going to have to make up their own mind about whether they trust the conversation between Peterson and Robinson or not. And the thing will go from there. However, Peterson does trust Robinson so much that he said he was going to fly into London to be at a meeting that took place yesterday, because Robinson is gathering together a wide coalition of people who share his share cultural values, and possibly be at the event on, I think, the 27th of July. Now, and he's invited Robinson back for a second interview because he judged that 1 hour, 20 minutes was too long. So the question is going to be how people react when they hear this. But the really powerful thing is it's broken the surface. It's broken through the silence. It's broken the grip of the conspiracy. And now people have the opportunity of making up their own minds. Well, each one of our listeners can make up their own minds. I know what I believe.
As we said at the beginning, the thing is, this is about truth. If what Tommy says is true, and as I've said, as I watch it, I believe what he said is true. If what he said is true, then that's why it matters. So he's not a Christian. So some people might say, why are you concerned? He's not a Christian. And you had the experience of saying, well, if he laughed at you and said, oh, this guy tried to convert me. It's a real shame that he's not a Christian. And I hope he becomes a Christian. What I hope is that he sees that any instinct for truth he has is an instinct for God. Any instinct he has for justice is an instinct for God. I hope he makes that connection. But whether he does or not, where we see truth, justice, goodness, and beauty, we see God. These are glimpses of the kingdom. And the same as the injustices against the Uyghurs in China. They're Muslim. They're not Christians. But do we stand up against it and say this is an outrage, this is a genocide? Yes, we do. Not because they're Christians and we only stick to our own, or we only, we're only interested if people say they're going to be Catholic, but because it's about justice itself, and calling out against injustice. So what's happening to the Uyghurs is a disgrace. But also, I can't read my own writing. Oh yeah, I also thought what was really interesting was...
That's because you haven't got your new glasses yet.
No, but they are on their way. I've got to wait about 10 days. What I also thought was interesting was that you said it's all about raping girls, and it is largely about that. But it's actually about that because it's about something bigger. So a lot of what he was saying was actually what surprised him, and what he was able to demonstrate was the connection between, let's say, the militant radical Islam that we associate with the terrorist attacks that we've seen over the decades, the ISIS, the Daesh, and so on, and ordinary street gangs selling drugs. They're not necessarily religiously Muslim. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're taking drugs, they're gambling. So the religion isn't thing. But what I thought came across was the attempt to weaken, a population, to weaken hordes of young people through drug addiction, to make them slaves. We talked in our discussion about Russell Brand about the culture he grew up in, which is enslaving. And these young people were given fast cars and hugs and drugs and booze. And doesn't that all look very nice? Until you realise it's just a method for control. It's a method to get you vulnerable and to control you and to abuse you and to use you. And so I thought what was one of probably the most interesting things to pick up on from the whole conversation, and it really came right at the end, was the recognition that part of the reason this has happened is because men have stopped being men and women have stopped being women. In that, what that means is we no longer recognise ourselves as created beings. We no longer recognise, largely, many do, but you understand my point, culturally, as a culture, we don't acknowledge that we have been created and that our sex is a givenness, and that our masculinity and our femininity is given and calls something out of us, that it calls us to be, to live a certain way. Now, he said, so he was talking about these men raping young girls and his group of his football mates, and they stood up against it. But essentially what he's saying is not hugely dissimilar. We're talking about very young girls, which is awful. But I was talking with my dad, who I've mentioned a few times just recently, about we were in a coffee shop, which he said used to be a dance hall. And he said, this used to be a dance hall, and I used to take Beryl or someone, down here in the late 1940s, early 50s. And he would tell me about the dates he went on, and they, he'd pick her up from her parents' house, and he'd drop her off nearby, but never go to the door. And it was all as, as much of a 1950s movie as you can imagine. And I said to him, Dad, do you want to know what life was like when I went to university in the 1990s? And I think it's probably got worse since then. And I told him what a night out, a nightclub might look like, what might happen at that nightclub, what people might be left like the next morning. And he said, why has it become like this? And we talked about the different reasons why. But the thing is, we have a culture that has made men pusillanimous. Yeah, they think being a strong man is how many women you conquer. The opposite is true. Jesus Christ is the perfect model of a man, and he says to a man, look, I can look the greatest power in the land, Pontius Pilate, in the eye and say, you don't know what truth is. What is truth? I can stand strong despite the fact that I'm scourged and whipped and beaten because I stand for truth. In St. Paul's letters, what is a husband? Husband, love your wives as Christ loves the church and gave himself up for her. A strong man, a man's man, a man as he has been created to be, absolutely defends a woman, defends her dignity, defends her honour, respects her, elevates her. It sacrifices himself for her, takes risks for her. That's what a real man is. And that's what a man does. And what Tommy Robinson seemed to be saying is, where are these men? Where are these men in the face of this abuse of our innocent young children? And we have to ask ourselves a deeper question, irrespective of the Islamic gangs, which is one problem. How have we allowed our culture to get to this point where we say, just meet people, use them, abuse them? Pope Benedict says, love people and use things, not use people and love things. So something has gone very rotten in our culture that is bigger than all of this. So this is definitely a part of it that needs addressing. But we've introduced a contraceptive pill, and a lot follows from that. We have made sex recreational, and we make sex recreational, and we all that follows from that are all the things in our culture that are rotten that we see today. So I thought Tommy's point about men need to be men. Yes, they do. But what that means is not being a hard nut with a baseball bat and going and smashing all the Islamic extremists. It means doing the really hard thing of holding yourself to a high standard, of having virtues, of speaking truth, but never lowering yourself to the level of getting into scraps and using the same offensive language against those who use it against you, and absolutely standing up and defending our women. And that's not just defending them against paedophile Muslim Pakistanis who Tommy Robinson, but it means going to a nightclub, going to a party, going to a disco, going to a dinner and interacting with a woman in a respectful way. If men can't do that, then it's no good calling out these Islamic gangs if they're just going to go and treat women in the same dishonourable way in society.
I was very moved at the way in which the people who threatened Tommy Robinson chose to do so by threatening his mother, his wife, and his daughters. And how did they do that? So people will say Robinson is a far-right mortgage fraudster criminal who changed his name. I understand he did get involved in mortgage fraud on behalf of one of his cousins, I think. I don't know how serious it was. Whether or not that stops whether or not that puts people into a category where you make them untouchable, other people will have to judge. The reason he changed his name was because local reporters discovered who he was, and they went round, and Muslim gangs went round to his house and threatened to rape his mother. So he changed his name and moved out. When he was in prison, the Muslims who brought him food said, "There's a hit job ordered on your wife. She's going to have acid thrown into her face today." Robinson had no access to a phone or to know. He was left with the horror of that threat in solitary confinement. In terms of his daughters, the way this began was because when he was 12, his 14-year-old cousin was gang raped and left running down the street naked afterwards. And of course, people threatened to do the same thing to his children. I found myself very embarrassed because I saw Robinson and Jordan Peterson. I don't think either of them are the best, the most well-developed psychological characters. One could know Peterson's had trouble with drug addiction, and we were just discussing earlier on how a public figure has gone for him for exaggerations or weaknesses. Robinson is quite clearly not entirely in his right mind. Who would be after what he'd been through? But I found myself asking the question, having told myself that one of the things I was trying to do for Jesus was to speak the truth in the public space, comforted myself with at least the fact that, well, I'm trying to do the right thing. I found myself realizing that if I'd been faced with the threats against my family, my relatives that Robinson had been faced with, I absolutely don't believe I'd have the courage to do what he's done. I also am not sure, having watched Peterson take on the whole woke culture, whether I would have had the courage in the face of the cancellation that Peterson had to face, or the intelligence, or the moral fibre to stand up in the way he has done. So to tell you the truth, I found myself a bit ashamed in the face of these two men, because I think they showed the most extraordinary degree of courage, the right kind of masculinity, as you say, and I wonder how many of the rest of us are up to it.
Well, that's a very honest answer, and I think it's a very, very difficult thing that he's done, and not everyone will be called to do that or can do that. But again, I think part of the point I was making is pointing out that in our everyday lives we can make little witnesses to truth, to goodness, to beauty. We can respect the dignity of women, and it doesn't happen with the filth that we're teaching our young children in schools. And so those are the ways in which we can, yeah.
Can I just say this? I mean, I realised that I wasn't following on from your trajectory. What I heard you saying was, Catherine, have these concerns about culture, and I'm putting it out there. And I thought you expressed it extremely well. I don't think I could have taken that on any further. So I then ran a different strand of an aspect of culture that I was concerned with, which was courage, masculinity, putting them side by side, not
Yeah, no,
attempting to deflect yours.
I realise that. I think I was just linking them again. Look at that, Gavin. Hey, look at that. I do well in an essay, didn't I? Link. So I was linking them again after you'd made that point to say, yes, you're right, but actually the two stand together. It's looking at the small ways that I think ultimately we have to be the change we want to see. It's that old thing, we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And we have to deal with those real problems, and we can't ignore them. And I think Tommy Robinson has been very good at drawing attention to those very, very real problems that we still haven't dealt with and need to deal with. But we deal with them twofold. One is calling out those problems and then looking at ourselves and saying, I don't want to be part of a problem.
Let's say,
whether it's this type of problem or that type of problem, I don't want to be somebody who causes these problems in society. And a lot of it is it's interesting you talk about wives and daughters. Isn't that always the way, Gavin? Isn't that the strategy of the enemy? It absolutely fears women. And who crushes the head of Satan but Mary? And how does she do it? In her complete humility. So this is the way we win. And this is a spiritual battle. And we need to get on board in the right way, in both ways, practically, the way we live our lives, spiritually.
and to forestall people who quite rightly will say, what's the Catholic dimension on this? When the Catholic Church has hosted paedophilia of a grotesque kind, the answer is that's absolutely true. The organisation as itself, or the fact it's a church, offers no automatic immunity. And I think so I'm proud about the teaching of sexual ethics that the Catholic Church engages in, because I don't see any other church, any other organisation, any other ethical structure having as clear and cogent a teaching about sexuality, particularly the virtues of celibacy and also against contraception. But I'm only too aware, as you are, and Mark is, of the grotesque failure of the Catholic Church to expose paedophilia and to hold people to account for it. And so we have to say that we're part of an organisation that is not doing what we're asking you to do, but that we would apply exactly the same standards to those in the Catholic Church who practice the same immorality as the people we've been describing, that Tommy Robinson has been describing.
If I say don't smoke, so it's bad for your health, while blazing up a big doobie, then I'm a massive hypocrite, but I'm not wrong. So the church, you can accuse the church of hypocrisy, and you can call out the Catholic Church, and you can say, what about the scandals in your own church? And we as Catholics will say, quite right, those scandals are scandalous, they're terrible, they need to be called out as well. But that doesn't change the fact that the teaching of the church is true. Yeah. The teaching of the church is good. The teaching of the church is beautiful. The teaching of the church is from Christ himself. It is Holy Mother Church. And actually, the church has never taught that any of these things are acceptable, but you get fallen human creatures, and they behave in this way, and it's a scandal. It's an absolute scandal. But I think a return to Our Lady, a return to this understanding of femininity is also crucial. I know I keep going on about it, and it's a big thing of mine, which I speak a lot about and hoping to write more about. But I think actually, if we pulled at this thread even more, and if we had time, and we're already well over on abbreviated, but another time, I think we might see a lot of this linked to a destruction of femininity through many forms and many ways, but absolutely destroying femininity. And that's where some of the most awful things that we've seen and that we've spoken about today can come in and have come in, and a destruction of masculinity. So I think a restoring of both right femininity and right masculinity are crucial to solving these problems.
Yes, I was listening to Scott Hahn talk about St. Paul and being reminded that one of the things St. Paul rejoices about, as one of the best things about being a Christian, is this new creation. That once you give yourself to Christ, your natural masculinity, your natural femininity, your natural personality, they're all reconfigured. And therefore, there's this lovely phrase, no one looks at any other Christian, katasarks, according to the flesh, but in the spirit, in this new creation. And what we have to pray for both Peterson and Robinson, that they discover what it is to be this new creation in Christ, and to join together the spiritual renewal of moral courage
Yeah,
along with
absolutely. I
the
think that's a good
extraordinary
place to end, and a
human
plea
courage
for
they've both
prayers
shown greatly, I think, to their credit.
for Jordan, Tammy, and Tommy Robinson and his family, and all those people who we can see have those instincts but haven't yet made that journey. So let's continue to pray for them. Well, thank you, Gavin. I know.
It was your friend Tammy who set it up, by the way. It was Tammy who wanted to interview him. And Jordan said, "You're not doing this without me. I want in on this." And I hear she's been busy. She's been busy inviting you to international women's conferences, which I think is a great thing, to give you a platform that you
there's an
deserve.
even
Anyway,
better
God
note
bless
to end
Tammy.
on.
It
So
sometimes takes a woman to see what ought to
I'll
be done.
leave it there for today. Thank you for watching Wednesday, the 10th of July, and we'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, the 11th of July. And as I said at the beginning, if you enjoyed this, if you found it valuable, this is something that we put out to members. So if you liked it, do pick up a membership, and then you'll get these delivered straight to your inbox each day. Some might be 10 minutes, some might be 40 minutes. We do our best to be abbreviated, but at 48 minutes, we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I am the penitentially prolix Gavin Ashenden.